Take your time, Eric. One of the only improvements I'd give you to those last slides, if the greens could be richer and the blues could be deeper, that would make all the screenshots of GitHub look so much better. So I'm Jamie Jones from GitHub. I'm ready to go. So this talk is convincing the ops to be part of DevOps. This is tips, tricks, and strategies to start a DevOps practice when your operations staff may be a little hesitant. I come from you, as I mentioned, from GitHub. I'm their government solutions lead, deal with government agencies, departments, components, and projects every day. So unfortunately, I see a lot of this. This is me with one of my customers. I came before GitHub from the government doing development, technical architecture, and project management for just over a decade. My last customer was the US Navy. You can imagine from an operations standpoint, it's hard enough to have your servers floating 5,000 miles away from you, but imagine no visibility into their reliability, their status, or what people are actually using it for. It created an environment for us where developers were throwing things at best over the wall, at worst against the wall. We didn't have a low-risk environment, we had a no-risk environment. But that's not what we wanted, right? I felt like my life was the living embodiment of the Phoenix Project. Half of me is Brent, putting out fires, multitasking across 30 projects. And the other half is Bill, trying to get our devs and our ops and our security teams all to work better together. So before I go into sort of why these tips are important and what can make sense, I want to touch into a little bit about why we're at the place we are today. Why engineers and developers want efficiency while ops wants that stability. So as developers, we spend so much of our time reducing friction, improving our tool chains. How many in the room use Swift? Swift wasn't even a language 2 years ago. Slack has a JavaScript framework that wasn't a framework 2 weeks ago. We're constantly doing change to improve our life. How about our friends in ops? They're using the same Perls and Pythons and Bash that they have for decades, because their life is consistency. Their life is repeatability. Their life is knowing what's going to happen before they've even taken on the project. They want that consistency. They want to run their current cloud just like they ran their room-sized mainframe 4 decades ago. So this background, I think, is really important as we talk about how to get to DevOps. So the first tip I have for you is, as developers, to really know what you want. Are you looking for continuous delivery and repeatable deployments? Or are you looking for Chef? Are you looking for infrastructure as code and dependency management? Or are you looking for Docker? One's technology insertion, and the other is successful DevOps. So understanding the difference between the two of those is really key. Your operations staff is probably already doing some of this. It's just in Bash and Perl and Python today. At GitHub, where we fully embrace ChatOps and manage all of our infrastructure with it, under the covers, there's still a lot of Bash. We don't have to reinvent the whole tech stack just to get more towards DevOps. So a rose by any other name is still a rose. DevOps by any other tooling is still DevOps. So most definitely focus on what you want, the outcomes, rather than the tools or the journey to get there. My second tip for you, we need to increase our empathy towards our friends in ops. They care about repeatable deliveries, no downtime, but they have a bunch of other requirements too that we as developers can sort of ignore. We're not writing security documentation in SSPs. We're not doing machine templates and system manuals. That's all part of their day-to-day life. So while it's easy for us to say, hey, we can fix this deployment thing with Docker, and we'll ignore the rest of what you have going on in your world. We need to have the empathy to listen to them, because at the end of the day, they're the ones left holding the bag and literally being kept up at night when that pager and that deployment goes down. So by having this empathy to understand their full problem set and their full set of requirements, we can both go together and hold the bag with them. We can work to an environment where we're both sharing that responsibility and then sharing the benefits of coming together. Finally, my last tip, which as a developer is the hardest, is to understand that there will still be gates. Much like energy, requirements and regulations are not created or destroyed, they're just altered. Over the years, like we've seen in the technology stack, developers have done a great job of pushing those gates onto the operations staff. If we really are going to work together as a team, we have to accept some of that friction has to come back to us, because we truly are on the same team. And those gates, those regulations are there for a reason. We can automate them, we can improve them, but we need to accept the responsibility to owning some of them because we are on the same team. So hopefully these tips will help you, developers, and organizations get closer to DevOps, especially in the federal government. Thank you all.
Hey, I'm Jason. I'm going to be taking some time to talk about some coffee. And actually, after my talk, I've got 3 coffee gift cards to give away. So yeah, let's do that at the end. But we can go. So last year, I was at DevOps Days Ohio with Nathan. And Nathan said that we should talk about coffee over DevOps. And I thought, that's a great idea. Because everybody loves coffee. It's delicious. It's full of caffeine. In fact, the commonly held origin of coffee was that it was discovered by an Ethiopian goat herder who noticed his goats were energized by eating coffee. So the US has a long history with coffee. We actually transitioned from being tea drinkers to coffee drinkers following the Boston Tea Party. And then prior to World War II, and rationing with that, the average American drank over 40 gallons of coffee every year. So the first wave of coffee really was commodity coffee. It wasn't much different from military rations. It was pre-ground coffee that they put into tins, and despite what Folgers would have you believe, it was more about drinking something hot than something that tasted good. But in 1971, Starbucks came around and started what would become the second wave of coffee. See, Starbucks has this love affair with Italy. So they roast their beans in a dark Italian style, and they make Italian-style drinks like cappuccinos, and they use Italian words like venti and grande to confuse you. But they also take an Italian approach to coffee culture. So Starbucks aimed to become your third place. Your life would be home, work, and Starbucks. The third place is where you find your community. And so this value on community placed a value on people. And that value on people is why Starbucks started to offer more benefits to their employees. It also led to the rise of things like fair trade and direct trade. Because when you value people, you realize that, well, coffee farmers are people too. And the thing is, if you realize that coffee farmers are people, you realize that they're trying to do their best work. They're trying to grow the best coffee beans that they can. And so if you have empathy and you place a value on these people, you care about the things that they care about, and you start to care about the coffee beans. And that led to what's called the third wave of coffee. The third wave of coffee is when we started roasting coffee and brewing coffee to highlight and accentuate the best parts of the coffee beans. And it didn't take long for this care of coffee beans and this empathy to infect customers. I mean, how many of you grind your own coffee? How many of you purchase coffee and you like to know what region it comes from, or you change the way that you brew coffee? Well, let's talk a little bit about DevOps history. Well, the first wave of DevOps is Dev and Ops. It's the tradition of throwing things over the walls and having silos. And it's pretty much the same as when we had coffee farmers selling to commodity traders who had just put things in tin cans. The second wave of DevOps really is where we're at right now. It's where we understand that Dev and Ops are just people, that we're all on the same team, working towards the same goals, and trying to build good applications. But just like Starbucks, second wave of DevOps is largely about community. We're all here at DevOps Days. We have meetup groups and we have Slack channels. We have forums where we can gather together and share information and learn from each other. But what I really think we need is third wave DevOps. See, third wave DevOps is when treating each other humanely and working together isn't such a novelty, right? When it just becomes the norm. Third wave DevOps is really about focusing on the applications and the services that we're building, trying to build the best digital experiences for our customers. And the way that we can do this really is to stop thinking of DevOps as self-serve ops for devs, right? When we overly focus on these automation platforms, on software platforms and tooling, we essentially have turned ops into dev. And we don't want dev-dev, we want DevOps. So the way that we can combat this is very similar to the way that coffee roasters and coffee brewers are starting to visit farms and understand the nuances of beans. It's really to get ops involved up front in dev projects, to understand the nuances of code, the business motivations that are going on behind the applications that developers are building. When we do this, then operations can start to build infrastructure that's designed to best support the applications that are being deployed. And ultimately, just like coffee, this will affect our customers. They may never understand the technical underpinnings of what we're building in the same way that I'll never understand the microclimates and geography of Indonesia, but I do know that I have a preference for Indonesian coffee over coffee from Kenya. So similarly, if we adopt third wave DevOps, if we make DevOps culture a norm and start to focus on better experiences, we'll win our customers and ultimately we'll have more successful organizations. So with that said, thanks. If you're a woman here, since it's International Women's Day, and you're local to Maryland, and you've never been to Ceremony Roasters, which is an amazing third wave coffee roaster here in Maryland, raise your hand. All right. Got one over there, one in the middle, and one here up front.
So what I think of Ignite Talks is that if all my work meetings were 5 minutes, I'd have a lot more time in the day. My name is Tanu, and I'm here to talk about DevSecOpsness, adding the business dimension to DevOps, because I have been burned quite bad by not considering the business before, and I don't want you to feel the same pain. So I used to think that the ideal state of reaching DevOps was DevSecOps or rugged DevOps, whatever you want to call it, but basically devs and ops and security working together in joyous harmony, doing great things. And this was a relatively good state, and it gave lots of great benefits, all the benefits that you probably already know about: collaboration, integrated security, automation, yada, yada, yada. It was all good. But there was one problem, so that's the little teaser for later. But with all these benefits, your product owner was probably pretty happy, or if they weren't happy, they should have been very happy. They're getting requirements delivered, they're getting transparency into the work, they're delivering early and often, they're expediting releases. But here's the kick. What about the business? Your product owner speaks for the business, typically, but the product owner can actually be wrong, and that was an experience that I had. We delivered an amazing product, and it was put on the shelf because the product owner was actually wrong. So what about the business? How do you know that your code or your automation or your security risk or your control framework or whatever it is, how do you know that it's actually adding any business value? At the end of the day, is it actually providing your business with what the business needs? You see, business value is kind of a tricky thing to define. What is business value? Is it value to your end users? Is it some new feature? Is it just simply cost reductions? Is it trust from your customers? Is it something else? Or is it what your CEO tells you? Is it what your COO tells you? There's conflicting forces within the business that make it very hard to define what the business value actually is. There's a resource called the Art of Business Value book that I recommend reading if you're curious about that. But what I encourage you to do is you take that proactive position and you add the business dimension to yourselves and to your teams. So how do you actually do that? Well, if you're a developer, I challenge you to be the challenger. Challenge the requirement. You can challenge the requirement and the product owner and ask the questions to glean what exactly is the business benefit of this particular requirement. And if you're on the operations side, you can do the same thing, but with respect to the process. Whatever process you're automating, don't automate a bad process. Continuous monitoring, continuous compliance, these are all good things, but at the end of the day, is your solution providing real benefit to your users and to your business? And on the security side, challenge the risk. Don't just do security for security's sake. For example, encrypting data at rest may be a good idea, but what if your data is public? What if there's a cost of client-side encryption? Think about the benefits again. So finally, my basic point here is every person in your organization needs to understand the business impacts, no matter what their role is. And the next few slides, I'll go through a few questions that you can start asking yourselves and asking your teams. So the first question is the simplest one. What is the purpose of your application or your system? I've asked this question before, and the answer I got was mobile. That's not the right answer. Mobile is an attribute. It's not the actual purpose of the application. So everybody on your team should know what that is. Same thing for alignment. How is your requirement, the thing that you're delivering, how is that aligned to your overall business strategy, your technology roadmap, your security roadmap, whatever it may be? The point here is everything in the organization should be aligned, from the nitty-gritty requirement to the top strategy. Finally, cost. Every business cares about cost. So you need to consider total cost of ownership if you aren't already, and any alternative analysis that you're actually doing. And so that's one-time cost, recurring costs, things like that. And finally, you have to be practical. Your ideas are quite innovative, but there are operating constraints that every business faces. You need to also understand not only what the constraint is, but is it real or perceived? Because if it's perceived, then you can also challenge it. And like I said, you might have great ideas, which I'm sure you all do, otherwise you wouldn't be here, but there's a market out there, and you need to understand what that market is doing. What are the market trends? How does that factor into your solution? And then finally, if you're the business, so now you're happy, because presumably you're making money doing all these great things, but there's something called business agility, which is a whole topic on its own. My point here, though, is we're adding business to the DevOps, so let's also add DevOps to the business. And so if you practice all this, then you can say that you're practicing DevSecOpsness, or simply put, you are doing DevOps, you're just doing it well. Thank you.